First of all, it is true, of course, American history is replete with racism, and some people are currently affected by racism in the past. You may not have inherited as much wealth if your parents lived under Jim Crow. Obviously, that's true. But we cannot fix that with more racism. Injustice does not solve injustice. Taking somebody else's property does not fix the problem that your grandfather's property was taken from you. We can't fix where we start in life, but we can fix where we're going. It turns out that if you don't want to be poor, permanently poor in the United States, all you have to do is three things. There's three things, according to the Brookings Institute. You can do all of these. They're very easy, right? Get married before you have babies, finish high school, get a job. That's it. But all of this is white privilege, right? All of these disparities have to be white privilege. It can't be that more black people are committing crimes. It can't be that crack is more dangerous than powder cocaine in terms of distribution. It can't be that more black people are in jail because more black people are being convicted, because more black people are involved in the issues that lead to conviction. It can't be any of that. It's all white privilege. Everything is white privilege. When black people riot in Baltimore, a majority black city, with a majority black police force, with a black police commissioner, with a majority black city council, with a black mayor, with a black president, with a black attorney general, that's all white privilege.
And the issue is that white privilege makes people uncomfortable to talk about the societal privilege that they have.
Well, to me, what I say on campuses all the time is if you want to cite instances of racism that we can all find and fight together, that's something that I'm more than willing to stand next to you and fight, because that's obviously stuff that we should fight together. But when you just say that there is a white privilege out there in the ether and that by dint of birth your skin color generates for you an advantage, what you're really saying to people is that your view is less valuable because you have not experienced what I've experienced. And that is an identity argument, that's a character argument, that's not a rational political argument that can actually be taken on in any way. It's more of a cudgel and a club than it is an attempt to open a discussion. There's not a white person anywhere that is forcing a black person to sleep with a black person, conceive a child, and then not get married. It's not happening. And, you know, if we're going to talk about groups that are really disproportionately benefiting from the American dream and how the system has been constructed for them, then we really ought not to be talking about the white folks. We ought to be talking about those darned Asians. Right? It's Asian privilege we really ought to worry about, because Asians are now the highest earning subgroup in the United States. They earn more than white folks. And it turns out that Asians get into better colleges at a higher rate than white folks. And when I was going to college, it was 1,600 on the SATs, right? 1,600 was the perfect score. Princeton University did a full study, a full workup of affirmative action, essentially. And what they found is that black people at top universities were being given a 230-point bonus on the SATs. Asians were being penalized 50 points, which, of course, they deserve. Because, let's face it, there's been Asian privilege in this country since the very founding. Our founders were rich Asian men who came along and wrote the Constitution specifically for the benefit of Asians. Which explains why mysteriously the Constitution is in Korean.
My question is, I'm doing a speech in my public speaking class about white privilege and why it's a myth. Mm-hmm. And when I brought up this topic in class, everybody just
lost their mind.
Yeah. And they said, you can't talk about it because you're white. And it's, you know, how do you respond to that?
I mean, the first thing I would say is check your privilege. Right? I mean, why don't I get to say it because I'm white? Are you a racist? Is the argument less valid because I'm white? Why argue with the argument as opposed to arguing with the color of my skin? It seems a little bit racially discriminatory that you're not allowed to speak based on the color of your skin. Either the argument is good or the argument is bad. How about this? How about if I get a black friend to come in and I hand them the text of my speech and she reads it? Then is it a better argument?
Okay, thank you.
White privilege is a way to silence anybody who is not of color. That's what white privilege is. It is just a leftist bullshit term that means shut up because you are not a member of a minority group, a privileged minority group in the leftist space. It's reverse racism of the highest order. You're basically saying to white people who aren't racist, and you can't find any proof of their racism, that they must be racist because they're white. That is called racism. If you are accusing somebody of something simply because of the color of their skin without any evidence, that's called racism, gang.
The question is, given that there is unconscious bias, how does white privilege not
So number one, so when I speak about white privilege, yes, so when I speak about white privilege, I'm speaking specifically about behavior. Okay, there have been no studies, and really I've looked at these studies, the connection between what they call implicit bias, this is their favorite phrase now, implicit bias, unconscious bias, and biased behavior has yet to be proven at any level that is even remotely necessary to be used in, for example, a courtroom, which is why it's never been used in a courtroom. It is also true that there is no way, there really isn't, there's been no proven way to alleviate what they call unconscious bias, which means that we're ghost hunting. So what I would suggest is that if there is unconscious bias, and I'll acknowledge the possibility or the reality of unconscious bias, if there is, then I need you to I don't care about what's in people's heads so much as what they do. So if you point me to a racist behavior, don't worry, I'll let you respond. If you point me to a racist behavior, I'm happy to stand alongside you and protest it. What I can't do is protest about things in people's head that I don't know about because I'm not a mind reader.
In your video where you debunk white privilege, you talk about how white privilege is a made-up term by privileged minorities. So I was wondering if you can elaborate on some of the privileges that you think minority groups have.
Okay, so in privileges in law, so when I say privilege, I'm actually going to talk about legal standing. Okay, so affirmative action is a privilege. Affirmative action is a privilege. Subprime mortgages designed to appeal to minority recipients without proper qualifications, that is a privilege. Now, those are a couple examples of privilege. Privilege would also be the police being told that they can't police in communities the same way they would in other communities because they don't understand the problems of minority communities. That's a privilege. And by the way, these privileges are not helpful, but these are, as an overall matter, but it is certainly it's very difficult for me to see how it's not a privilege to get a lower score on the SAT than the Asian guy who's living in exactly the same circumstance. He gets penalized 50 points, you get 230 points on the SATs. That is definitionally a privilege. So there's one. Do you disagree?
Yeah, but I don't want to take up everyone's time, so I'm just going to let.
Do people have thoughts that don't manifest in behavior? Yes, all the time.
For instance?
For instance, every thought that you have about walking up here and strangling me right now. I assume like we have thoughts all the time that don't manifest in behavior, and this is true every single day. We consider thoughts that cross our minds. And the problem with unconscious bias is the idea is you don't even know that you're having the thought, right? So how can you stop it if you don't even know that you're having it? But then we should be able to gauge the unconscious bias and its impact on behavior. That's why it's unconscious bias as opposed to conscious bias. The idea behind unconscious bias is that it's not even a ghost, it's a ghost of a ghost, because you don't even know you're having the thought. So people, the whole idea behind diversity training is the idea that you can retrain people to stop their chain of thought in order so that it doesn't manifest in behavior. I don't think that every thought manifests in behavior. If it did, then every time a man saw a good-looking woman walk down the street, a straight man saw a good-looking woman down the street, we'd have a real mess on our hands. So the second question, the idea was a little too broad for me to respond to, which is just because something is tough, don't we have to face up to it? Yes, we have to face up to tough things all the time. And one of the tough things I would suggest that we face up to is that you have a lot more control over your own behavior and the decisions you make than the supposedly widespread unconscious bias of people you've never met. The poverty rate among two-parent black families in the United States is 7%. The poverty rate among white single-parent families is 22%. What happened to the white privilege? Why isn't the white single mother richer than the black two-parent family? Well, because single mothers are not richer than two-parent families. End of story. Would you like to know why there's a disproportionate poverty rate in the black community? Because there is a disproportionate single motherhood rate and dropout rate in the black community. Okay, as much as we can talk about white privilege, the fact is that the single motherhood rate in the black community in 1960 was 20%. Today, it is upward of 70%. Unless you are going to argue that racism in the United States has more than tripled in the same period of time that the civil rights movement had its great successes, this is nonsense. We cannot fix where you started in life. We can't. That's beyond your control. That's beyond my control. But the notion of white privilege suggests you can never, under any circumstances, overcome where you started in life. Because there's this big bear called white privilege that's trying to eat you. That if you make it, even if you make all the right decisions, white privilege will stand in your way. That is a lie.
How can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.